My father disowned me for marrying a poor man. 10 years later, he found out who my husband really was. The crystal glass shattered against the marble wall with a sound that echoed throughout the mansion. Red wine dripped down the white wall like blood, staining the imported wallpaper that had cost $15,000 a roll. You will not marry that pauper, and that is final. Edward Montgomery was 62 years old with perfectly styled grey hair, an Armani suit that cost more than a sedan, and a fortune of $80 million built on sweat, tears, and, according to many, very little ethics. He was the owner of Montgomery Developments, one of the largest construction firms in New York, and his only daughter, Isabella, 26 years old, had just announced she was marrying a public school teacher. Isabella was standing in the living room of the mansion in Westchester, her hands trembling but her chin raised in defiance. "I love Rafe, Dad, and I will marry him, with or without your approval." "Without my approval?" Edward snarled. "Then it will be without my money too. Without your name, without anything." Isabella's mother, Teresa Montgomery, a 58-year-old woman who had spent her entire life as a silent, decorative wife, was sitting on the Italian leather sofa, her hands twisting a silk handkerchief. "Isabella, please," she said in a faint voice. "Be reasonable. You can find someone better, someone from our circle." "Rafe is from my circle," Isabella retorted, her voice rising. "He is intelligent, hard-working, kind. He treats me with respect. He loves me for who I am, not for the last name I carry or the bank account I have." Edward took a threatening step toward his daughter. "You want to know who this Rafe of yours is? A poor soul who makes $3,000 a month teaching in underfunded schools. He lives in a 900-square-foot rented apartment in Queens, drives a 2008 Corolla. Is that what you want? To trade all of this," he pointed to the opulence around them, "for a life of misery." "It's not misery to have less money," Isabella argued. "Misery is having everything and having no love, having a family that only cares about status and appearances." "How dare you?" Edward hissed. "I built all of this for you. Every brick of this house, every dollar in the account, was to give you a life I never had. And you throw it all away for a failed teacher. Rafe is not a failure. He chose a profession that makes a difference, that helps people. Something you never understood because you only know how to measure value in money." The slap came so fast, Isabella had no time to dodge. Edward's palm struck her face with force, snapping her head to the side. The silence that followed was absolute. Teresa gasped but did not move to help her daughter. Isabella put her hand to her burning cheek, tears in her eyes, but not from pain, from confirmation. Confirmation that she was making the right choice. Edward, realizing what he had done, took a step back, his hands still trembling with anger. "Isabella, No," she cut him off, her voice surprisingly calm. "Don't say anything. You just showed me exactly why I need to leave this house." She turned to leave, but Edward spoke again. "If you walk out that door to marry that pauper, never come back. You are disowned. You will have no access to any account, any credit card, not a single cent of what is mine. Your name is removed from the will. To me, you cease to exist." Isabella stopped at the door, not turning around. "That's fine, Dad. Because to me, you ceased to exist a long time ago." She left without looking back. She heard her mother start to sob, heard Edward yell something, but she didn't stop. She took the keys to her white Mercedes convertible, a 25th birthday present, and drove away from that golden prison for the last time. Raphael Rafe Olson was waiting in the small but cozy apartment he rented in Queens. He was a literature teacher at a public high school, 28 years old, a graduate of NYU who had chosen to work in a less affluent area because, he said, that was where they needed good teachers the most. When Isabella arrived, her face still red from the mark of her father's hand, Rafe hugged her without asking questions. He simply held her while she cried. Later, sitting on the worn but clean sofa, drinking tea from mismatched mugs, Isabella told him everything. Rafe listened in silence. When she finished, he simply said, "Are you sure? Because there's still time to go back. I would understand if you didn't want to give up everything." Isabella held his face in her hands. "Rafe, I have never been sure of anything in my life. I grew up in a gilded cage. Everything I had was bought, including the people around me. Friends who only wanted my money. Suitors who wanted my last name. You were the first person who saw me. Not the heiress, not Edward Montgomery's daughter, just Isabella. And that is worth more than all of my father's millions." They were married a week later. Her simple ceremony at the courthouse, witnessed by two of Rafe's teacher colleagues and a childhood friend of Isabella's, the only one who hadn't abandoned her when the money ran out. Isabella sold the Mercedes. With the money, they paid for the wedding, bought basic furniture for the apartment, and saved the rest as an emergency fund. Life changed drastically. Isabella, who had grown up with maids doing everything, now learned to cook by watching YouTube videos. She did laundry, cleaned the house, went grocery shopping, calculating every penny. Rafe made $3,200. Isabella got a job as a receptionist at a clinic, $2,000. Together, $5,200. Rent ate up $1,500. That left them with $3,700 for everything. Food, bills, transportation, medicine, unexpected expenses. The first few months were a shock. Isabella cried hidden in the bathroom when she missed the comfort, not the wealth itself, but the security, of not having to worry if there would be money for gas, for the dentist, for a pair of shoes that had a hole in them. But Rafe was always there, patient, loving, sharing the entire burden. And slowly, Isabella discovered something surprising. She was happy, genuinely happy in a way she had never been in the mansion. The years passed. Isabella went back to school, got a degree in education at night while working during the day. Rafe was getting his master's degree on weekends, dreaming of one day teaching at a university. They had two children, Peter, born when Isabella was 28, and Sophia 2 years later. Children raised with little money but a lot of love. They played at the neighborhood park, not at expensive country clubs. They wore clothes from thrift stores, not designer brands, but they were happy. Isabella sometimes passed by the buildings of Montgomery developments. She saw her father's name on giant billboards, advertising luxury new developments. She felt a pang, not of longing, but of something she couldn't name. Curiosity, perhaps. Did he ever think of her? She never knew that Edward, a few times, had his driver pass by the school where Peter and Sophia studied, just to see his grandchildren from a distance. Children he would never know because of his pride. Then came the 10th wedding anniversary. Isabella was 36, Rafe 38. They still lived in the same small apartment in Queens, now more cramped with 2 children, but it was theirs. They had bought it with a mortgage after years of saving. It was on a Friday that everything changed. Rafe came home with a strange expression, part nervous, part excited. "Isabella, we need to talk." She felt her stomach tighten. In the movies, that phrase never preceded good news. They sat in the living room while the children played in their room. Rafe took a deep breath. "You remember I told you about my grandfather? The one who died when I was little?" Isabella nodded. He had mentioned him a few times, a man he had barely known. "Well, my grandfather, Jacob Olson, he was, well, different from what I thought." "What do you mean?" Rafe pulled some papers from his bag. "These are documents the estate finally released. Isabella, my grandfather wasn't just a farmer from the countryside like they always told me. He was a landowner, a lot of land. In Montana." Isabella took the documents. They were deeds, several hundred acres of land. Attached were market valuation reports. Her eyes widened. "Rafe, this says these lands are worth $52 million, he completed. "And there's more. My grandfather had investments, stocks, funds, everything managed by a firm I didn't even know existed. In total, the inheritance being divided between my father and my uncles sums up to $84 million. The silence that followed was one of absolute shock. Rafe continued, "My father never wanted this money. He said Grandpa made it through shady land deals, that it wasn't clean. So he turned his back on all of it. He became a teacher, lived a simple life. But now that Grandpa is dead, he can't refuse the inheritance without legal complications. And my father is old. He doesn't want to fight with his brothers in court." "How much?" Isabella asked in a faint voice. "How much is coming to you?" "My father is dividing his share between me and my 2 sisters. It comes to—" Rafe paused. "About $28 million each." Isabella had to sit on the floor. Literally. Her legs wouldn't support her. $28 million. More than 3 times the fortune of the father who had disowned her. Rafe knelt beside her. "Isa, I know it's a shock. It was for me too, but I need you to understand this doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change who we are." Isabella looked at her husband, the man she had chosen when he had 0, the man her father had called a pauper, and she started to laugh, a hysterical laugh of pure irony. "My father," she said between laughs and tears. "My father disowned me for marrying a poor man. And all along you were richer than him." "Technically I didn't know," Rafe pointed out. "So I wasn't rich, I was a poor man who was going to be rich." That made Isabella laugh even harder, then cry, then hug Rafe so tightly he gasped. "What do we do now?" she asked. Rafe thought. "I don't want to change everything. I don't want to move out of here, become some trust fund guy, buy meaningless things. But I also don't want our children to grow up without the opportunities that money can give." "Then we do both," Isabella suggested. "We stay who we are, but we use the money to make a difference, to have security, to help people." Rafe smiled. "That's exactly what I was thinking." They didn't tell anyone immediately. They didn't move. They didn't buy new cars. They used part of the money to pay off the apartment, but that was all that changed visibly. Rafe created a foundation, the Olson Education Institute. It funded scholarships for public school students to go to college. It built libraries in underserved communities. It trained teachers. Isabella went back to school, now without needing to work. She got her master's, her doctorate. She became a specialist in early childhood education for low-income families. But they continued to live in the apartment in Queens, driving simple cars, eating at neighborhood diners, because that was real. It was who they were. 10 years after the wedding, 17 years after Isabella left home, Edward Montgomery had a heart attack. It was massive. He survived, but was left debilitated. He needed constant care. And that was when he discovered something devastating. He was alone. Teresa had died 3 years earlier. Cancer she had hidden until she couldn't anymore. At the time, Edward had tried to contact Isabella, but the number he had was deactivated. He didn't know where she lived. He didn't know anything about her. The friends he thought he had disappeared when he could no longer do business. His partners revealed themselves to be vultures, fighting in court for control of the company while he was in the hospital. And Isabella, his only daughter, he didn't even know if she was alive. It was his lawyer, Mr. Morrison, who finally found her. It took weeks, but he got an address. An apartment in Queens. Morrison called first. Isabella answered suspiciously. "Mrs. Isabella Montgomery Olson?" "Yes. My name is Morrison Carter, your father Edward Montgomery's lawyer. He is very ill and is asking to see you." Isabella was silent for so long that Morrison asked if she was still there. "I am," she finally said. "Why should I visit him?" "Because he is dying, and he is alone. And even if you hate him, Mrs. Isabella, I've seen your record. You are a good person. Good people don't let even their worst enemies die alone." Isabella hung up without responding, but she spent days thinking. Rafe said he would support any decision. The children, now 13 and 11, didn't even know their grandfather. Finally, Isabella decided to go, not for her father, for herself, to close that chapter. The mansion in Westchester was different. Still large, still imposing, but gloomy. The garden was poorly kept. The paint was chipping in places. Isabella rang the doorbell and a nurse opened it. Edward was in a downstairs bedroom, converted into an improvised hospital room. Lying in a hospital bed, connected to machines, the man who once seemed gigantic now seemed small, fragile, old. He opened his eyes when Isabella entered. It took him a moment to focus, another to recognize her. When he did, tears began to stream down his face. "Isabella," he whispered, his voice weak, hoarse. Isabella pulled up a chair but kept her distance. "Hi, Dad." "You came?" "I did." Edward closed his eyes. "I thought you wouldn't come. I wouldn't deserve it if you did." "You don't deserve it," Isabella agreed without anger. "But I came anyway." "How are you?" he asked. "Well, happy. And that?" "Rafe, my husband is doing great. Thanks for asking." Edward seemed to shrink even more. "I was wrong about him. About everything." "You were," Isabella confirmed. They were silent for minutes. Edward finally spoke. "Do you have children?" "I do. 2. Peter and Sophia." More tears. "I'm a grandfather and I don't know my grandchildren." "You don't because you chose not to know them. I didn't hide from you, Dad. You threw me out." "I know. God, do I know. I spent 17 years living with that mistake." Isabella felt anger beginning to rise. "You didn't spend 17 years living with a mistake. You spent 17 years living with pride. If you really wanted to find me, you would have. New York isn't that big." Edward had no answer for that. Isabella stood up. "I'm leaving. I only came because I thought you deserved to know I made the right choice. Rafe was the best thing that ever happened to me. We had a hard life, but a happy one. Something I never had with you." She was almost at the door when Edward spoke. "Isabella, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but can I ask you to stay? Just a little longer. Being alone is worse than anything." Isabella stopped, thought. Then she came back and sat down. For the next hour, Edward talked. He told her how the company was being torn apart by treacherous partners, how friends had vanished, how Teresa had died, and he hadn't even been able to give her a proper funeral because he was in the hospital. He said he regretted everything, that he had spent years wanting to apologize, but pride had stopped him, that when he finally decided to look for her, he couldn't find her. Isabella listened, not with pity, but with something close to understanding. Edward was not a victim, but he was human, and humans make mistakes. When she was leaving, Edward asked, "Can I meet my grandchildren? Just once before I die?" Isabella thought for a long time. "I'll ask them. If they want to come, I'll bring them, but it's their choice. I won't force them. Thank you." At the door, Isabella stopped. "Dad, just so you know, Rafe wasn't poor. I mean, he was when we married, but his family has money, a lot of money, an inheritance he received years ago." Edward blinked, confused. "How much money?" Isabella smiled. "There's an education foundation, a research institute, donations. In total, his fortune is around $28 million, almost 3 times what you had at your peak." The expression on Edward's face was one of absolute shock. Isabella continued, "But you know what's funnier? Even after the money came, he kept being a teacher. We kept living in the same apartment, raising our kids with the same values. Because the money was never what mattered." She turned to leave but said one last thing. "You disowned me for marrying someone you thought was a pauper. And all along, I was marrying someone much richer than you. The irony is poetic, isn't it?" She left, leaving Edward to process that information. Peter and Sophia, when Isabella told them about their grandfather, were curious. They didn't hold a grudge against him. How could they? They had never known him. So they asked to visit. Rafe and Isabella brought the children. Edward cried when he saw his grandchildren. Peter had his nose, Sophia had his eyes. The children were kind but distant. It wasn't the warm embrace of grandchildren who love their grandfather. It was the politeness of well-raised children with a sick stranger. But for Edward it was more than he deserved. In the following months, Isabella visited. Not often, but regularly. Not out of love, out of humanity. And gradually, conversations happened. There was no reconciliation, no complete forgiveness. But there was understanding. Edward talked about his own childhood. He had grown up poor, the son of a construction worker, humiliated by the elite. He had built a fortune to never be looked down on again, and in the process he had become exactly the kind of person who had despised him, someone who measured value in money. Isabella talked about the life she had built, not to rub it in his face, but so he would understand. Understand that he had despised something precious based on irrelevant criteria. One day Edward asked, "Can you ever forgive me?" Isabella thought honestly, "I don't know. You hurt me deeply. You told me never to come back. You hit me. You disowned me. That doesn't disappear because you're sick now. I know, but I can understand you, and I think that's the most I can offer." Edward nodded. "It's more than I deserve." 3 months later, Edward Montgomery died. A final, quick heart attack in his sleep. In the will there was a surprise. He had left everything, what remained, about $12 million after the legal battles, to Isabella, and a letter. Isabella read the letter alone, in the living room of the now empty mansion. "My dear Isabella, if you are reading this, I have finally been freed from the prison I built with pride and greed. I hope it was quick and not too painful. I leave to you what remains of the empire I thought was so important. It is not much compared to what it was. The vultures took most of it, but it is yours. Not because you need it. I know now that you have built a life better than I ever gave you. I leave it because it is right, because it was yours by right all along. But more than money, I want to leave something more important, my apology. I know I will not deserve it, even if I lived 1,000 years, but I need to ask. I was wrong. About Rafe, about you, about everything. You were brave where I was cowardly. You chose love where I chose status. You built a real family where I built an empty facade. Rafe was not poor, but even if he were, you were right and I was wrong, because he was rich in what matters: character, integrity, love. And you, my daughter, are richer than I ever was or will be, not because of your husband's money, but because of the love in your family, because of the genuine happiness I saw in your eyes, even after all I did. If there is a heaven and a hell, I know where I am going. I deserve every flame, but I will go a little lighter knowing that you are well, that my grandchildren are loved, that my daughter is happy. I'm sorry for failing as a father. Thank you for being a good person in spite of me. I love you. I always did, even when I didn't know how to show it. Your father, Edward. Isabella folded the letter carefully. She kept it along with that proof of zero that Rafe had kept. Reminders that people can make mistakes, they can hurt, but they can also, even too late, learn. The funeral was small. Isabella, Rafe, the children, a few distant cousins, the lawyer. The partners who had fought over the company did not show up. The friends Edward thought he had no longer existed. Isabella did not cry. It was hypocrisy to pretend a grief she did not feel, but she did not feel satisfaction either, just sadness for the waste. Waste of years, waste of a relationship, waste of the love that could have existed. With the 12 million she inherited, Isabella and Rafe expanded the institute. They built campuses in 5 states. They gave scholarships to 1,000 underprivileged students a year. And on a plaque at the entrance of the main campus they had inscribed, "The Edward and Teresa Montgomery Education Institute, in memory of people who made mistakes, but whose mistakes taught us." Because that was the lesson. Not that Edward deserved redemption, not that everything was fixed in the end, but that even the biggest mistakes can teach. Even the worst choices can eventually generate something good if other people choose differently. Isabella and Rafe had 20 more years together. They raised their children, saw grandchildren. They kept a simple life despite the millions, because they learned early what it took Edward a lifetime to understand. Fortune is not in the bank. It is at the dinner table surrounded by people who love you for who you are, not for what you have. And that is the difference between being rich and having wealth. Peter, their son, became a lawyer, specialized in workers' rights. Sophia became a doctor. She worked in a public hospital, refusing to open an expensive private practice, because they grew up seeing that value is not measured in money. It is measured in impact, in character, in how many lives you touch for the better. The mansion in Westchester was sold. The money went to the institute. Today on the land there is a modern public school, fully equipped, a giant library, laboratories, and on the facade, a plaque. Here stood an empty mansion. Today, it is a school full of future. Isabella, when she told her story, always ended by saying, "My father taught me more by erring than he would have by being right. He taught me that pride is expensive, that love can't be bought, that contempt comes back, and that you should never ever measure someone's worth by the size of their bank account." And when asked if she had forgiven Edward, she answered honestly, "Not completely, but I understood." And I think understanding is more important than forgiving, because understanding sets you free. Forgiving is sometimes just pretending. Rafe and Isabella celebrated 30 years of marriage surrounded by 50 people at a barbecue at the Institute. No fancy party, just real friends, true family, cold beer, and a lot of love. And when someone asked Rafe if he ever imagined he would become a millionaire, he laughed. "I always knew I was a millionaire, because I have a wife who loves me, children who respect me, work that fulfills me. The money in the bank was just confirmation of what I already knew. I am the richest man in the world." This is the story of Isabella, the girl who lost her family for love and gained a whole life. ND.